Caregiving. It's one of the least supported roles in our society, but it's one of the most essential and one of the most ancient. Millions of adults today are navigating aging parents, family members with disabilities, and raising children, often all at once. We call it family responsibility, but in reality, it's almost like unpaid labor. This is AI Powered Caregiving, the podcast exploring how technology is reshaping the way we care for older adults. Today, we're talking about something even more fundamental, which is the lived experience of care. Our guest today is a mom of three, daughter to parents with dementia, well, may they rest in peace, and a sister and guardian to a brother with Down syndrome. She has a career as a social impact consultant working on social impact and gender equity worldwide, with a focus on Latin America. Her personal experiences with caregiving over the last decade have fueled her passion to build community and awareness around the needs of caregivers. She's a beautiful and passionate writer, and her Substack, Gen X Xandwich, is absolutely essential if you are any type of caregiver. Please welcome to the podcast, Ana de la Cruz.
Hi, Shania. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ana, for joining us. I'm really excited to delve into our topics today. I'll start by just asking you a little bit about your caregiving journey.
Sure. Yeah. So my caregiving journey started about 12 years ago when my first child was born. At the time, that was my intro to caregiving, becoming a mother. And shortly thereafter, it got much more intense. I had a second child, and my parents, up until then, had been doing fine. They were aging, but shortly thereafter, when I had two young children, my mom went into the hospital and she started to decline. She had physical health issues, and it became clear that she also had dementia. And so I was kind of thrown into having to figure out how to handle the situation, get her the care she needed. We had to change her living situation. She was living alone and she could no longer do that. She needed help with her finances. So I had to jump in with small children and figure out how to manage all of that. And then I had a third child just to keep things exciting. And my father sadly also started to decline. He started to have cognitive troubles. He started to have more health issues. And meanwhile, they were both guardians to my brother who has Down syndrome. And so I also became responsible for taking on more duties to ensure his care. I took over guardianship for him, which means kind of overseeing his finances and his overall health and well-being, although he is cared for in a facility that takes great care of him. So that was, I was thrown into it. And over the past 12 years, I've been doing all the things for all the people.
Yeah, something I love
Yeah.
about your story, and you're so open to sharing, and I really appreciate it. I know other people out there really appreciate it as well. But what really strikes me about your story is you have experienced caregiving from multiple angles, right? I think sometimes people think about maybe it's just for your aging parents, but no, a caregiver is anybody in any capacity that is taking care of another person or even a pet, I feel. Because when you're in that responsibility role, you have to handle, as you said, finances, people falling sick, their schedules, which I think is, even though it sounds like something small, it's a huge addition to your own managing your own life. Um,
Yeah, it
yeah,
all
can you
adds
speak?
up. It really does. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. No, no worries. So I'm wondering if you being in the middle of three different types of caregiving is somewhere where the term Gen X sandwich came from.
Yeah, I usually say Jen sandwich, but you can say it however you want. It's my term to kind of describe those of us in the kind of Gen X, Zennial, Millennial category that are many of us are finding ourselves in this position, and like me, just kind of thrown into it. I never thought about sandwich caregiving, as we call it, which is those of us caring for young kids and aging adults at the same time. But there's so many more people I came to realize in this position. Once I was thrown into it, it opened up this world to me like, oh, there's a term for this. It's called sandwich generation caregiving. And because of demographics today, people having kids older, later in life, and our aging population, it's becoming increasingly common. And so that's kind of what inspired me to start my newsletter and kind of build community around this, because I realized I I had no idea when I was thrown into it, and I would have loved to kind of have more of that, those resources available, hear stories from others, kind of share experiences. Yeah, because it's a wild ride, but it's not that uncommon. We just don't talk about it enough, I
Mhm.
think, is the reality.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit. Like when you started out, mentioned there weren't a lot of resources. Do you think that landscape is shifting now with more and more people becoming sandwich caregivers? Or is there still a lack?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both. I think it is shifting. It's shifting slowly. There's still not enough. I think there's still not enough discussion about caregiving and aging and just visibility and representation in our communities and our businesses and the media, because people still end up coming into this situation very underprepared or without knowledge of resources, without having had conversations with their loved ones about what they want or how to handle various caregiving situations. More and more, I think there's a growing contingent of people who are talking about, for example, paid family leave and um, motherhood and the unaffordability of childcare, which is great. I mean, we still have a long way to go in that category. And I think more people are starting to talk about aging, but it's discussed even less. We still have a long way to go. It's changing, but it's shifting slowly. And I think it's challenging because it's not something that's typically a moneymaker or glamorous to talk about. And people don't necessarily want to talk about their own, potential need for caregiving or being thrown into the position of taking care of a loved one. But it's so important because I think it would really help all of us do a better job when the time comes. And, there's a saying, I don't remember who quoted this, but it's like all of us will be either cared for, a caregiver, or both, probably both in our lifetimes. And so it's relevant to everybody. It's not a niche topic, but we sort of treat it like one.
Yeah, of course. And I do think that your Substack, your articles are really, really helpful because they're so open. And you can find them. It's Jen Sandwich. I'll making sure I'm saying that correctly. Jen Sandwich. And yeah, the articles are really helpful. I think you're so open. Do you find that it's hard for people to open up about their experiences caregiving? And kind of how did you end up being so willing to share and vulnerable? Did you have to go through any sort of process to get there?
I definitely. I think it's been actually really helpful for me to it's been a means for me to sort of heal from some of what I've gone through, to write about it. And then to get the sort of positive response that I've received, people saying, I really, your article spoke to me, or oh my gosh, I'm in a similar situation. This was so helpful to read. It was
Mm.
beautiful. I um, empathize with your situation, or thank you. It's really reaffirming to me that sharing is important, and for people to be able to see themselves and their experience in other people is so helpful. And again, for me, it's just been a way to kind of process everything I've been through, because a lot of it happened really quickly and I was just sort of making decisions on the fly. I didn't have any plan for how any of this was going to unfold, as usually we don't, because often caregiving journeys start with some kind of uh, dramatic event, honestly, a hospitalization or a fall or some kind of challenge. At least within elder care, it often starts that way. And so, we don't really have a lot of time to process or think about how we'd like to do things. And then there's a lot of thinking back to what would I have done differently? What would have helped me? How can I help other people not make the same mistakes I did, or share my research because I spent hours researching elder care
Mm.
options? How can I share that with others who may be in the position that I was a few years ago, and save them some of the headache that I went through?
That's really amazing. Have you made like new friends and new community through sharing your caregiving experience from all angles?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think Substack has been a great place for that because there are a lot of caregivers who write about their experiences, who are very open, who are, I think, in a very similar position that I'm in, wanting to share, wanting to build community. And so many of us have connected and follow each other and support each other. We do collaborations, and I've participated in some of those. And I have the goal of doing more interviews myself and collaborations. Of course, all of us struggle with time as caregivers, but there really is an amazing community there. And then also there's a number of organizations nationally and internationally that are working on these topics that are gaining more momentum. So yes, definitely. And it helps to have the community because it can feel really alone when you are thrown into these situations trying to manage things for a parent who may not understand or may be struggling with the lack of and loss of independence. It's helpful to have people who are in the same situation to talk to about it.
Completely. I think what I'm really hoping for, um, with like as you know, time is moving on, I think there are, as you mentioned, so many people in this country and abroad, everywhere, that are in this caregiving experience, but it's not something you really hear much about at work or in your day to day conversation. So I'm really hoping that we get to drive forward normalizing talking about caregiving in whatever capacity it is and the difficulties and the struggles. I'm also curious about the joys of caregiving. I think it is has its downs, obviously, but it also must have a lot of ups. What are some of the joys out of being a caregiver, a mom, a daughter, a sister that you've experienced?
Yeah, oh, there certainly are joys. Well, I love being a mom. I mean, I love having three kids. I never thought I would have three kids, honestly, but now I love having kind
In
of a
this
big
day and
family.
age,
I know, right? It's a lot, but it's also kind of amazing to see the three of them bond as siblings. And honestly, I do think about, as my husband and I get older, them having each other is going to be amazing. It's not going to fall on any one person. I mean, I am the only daughter that was able to support my mother, who has not been married since her and my dad divorced when I was young. So it's really fallen on me, and it honestly has been tough. And
mm,
so I think having my kids, have each other, and has been beautiful. And I love our big family. And I think also, having them get to know my brother who has Down syndrome. He's 50 now, but he's doing well. He's in a great situation. There's a nonprofit that oversees his care, but he's able to live in his own apartment. They just provide care within the apartment setting. And so, it's great to see him be able to live the best quality life he can. They have, beautiful events and community there. And my family is actually taking my brother to Disneyland next week. He's a huge Star Wars
oh,
fan. And so my kids and my brother are going to get to have some bonding time and, go on all the rides together. And so that will definitely be a moment of joy for our family, and, kind of bring things, I don't know if full circle is the right term, but, just being able to experience that joyful moment together with so many people I care about and for will be really beautiful.
yeah, you're the glue, honestly. You're that connection between them all. So that's lovely.
I guess that is very true. Yes, indeed.
And speaking a little bit on the joy, I suppose, I know that your father, from your blogs, that your father eventually had moved to Mexico and was in a facility or some sort of setup there, right? And
Mhm.
in your one of your blogs and on the issues of care migration, talk about how there are a lot of benefits to aging outside of America or aging in a different location. What do you think are some of those benefits?
Yeah, well, I'll start by just saying a little bit about what happened in our situation, which was that my dad started to decline. Also had cognitive challenges. And then he had a fall that was very serious. Broke his leg in several places. Wasn't really able to walk after that, and his husband at the time made the decision to move him to Mexico because they had always actually spent a lot of time in Mexico. They really loved Mexico, had spent winters there for many years.
Mm.
But he was in a nursing home here in the US, and there were several issues. One being that he was kind of locked away in a hospital like setting. So he
Mm.
was, um, well cared for, but not much interaction with other people aside from his visitors. And it was incredibly expensive. And, their insurance basically said, well, we're not going to cover any more days in the nursing home. But they also said that he wasn't really, the people at the nursing home were saying that he wasn't able to go home, that he wasn't strong enough to go home. So basically, they were in this situation of having to pay $500 a day out of pocket for nursing care,
Oh my God.
which is crazy. I mean, people don't save up for that. When you save for retirement, no retirement planner is advising you to save $500 a day for your nursing care. And that's what I think is, it's a big part of the conversation that needs to shift is the way we talk about money in retirement and planning for retirement. But I guess, that kind of goes into another topic, but needless to say, that just felt completely unsustainable and impossible for them. And they had friends who had moved family members, partners to a nursing home in Mexico that was a fraction of the cost. It could be covered with my dad's social security check every month, and it was full nursing care. And so he moved there, and the benefit was he was able to spend a lot more time outside in kind of a community setting with other people. The downside, it was a very tough situation for him to move in the condition he was in, and the care was different. And it's hard for people to adjust at an older age to really different cultural experiences. I like to say it's like the care was much more warm, but also less consensual. Or I shouldn't say that sounds bad, but it's sort of like people will pick you up and move you if they need to, rather than being very clear about explaining everything that's going to happen in the process. So anyway, there are just these little cultural shifts and challenges that made it harder. He was moving to a very different situation in kind of a fragile state. But there were some benefits, like I said, too. And something we really need to tackle is the lack of affordability and affordable options in this country for elder care. And then you're far away from loved ones if you
Yeah.
move in that kind of situation. So pros and cons, but it's an interesting trend that I think we really need to think more about and talk more about is people actually leaving the country due to lack of options here in the US.
Yeah, I mean, $500 a day is insane. I feel like that's just the nursing home cost, right? So you'd have other medical expenses on top of that, I'm imagining.
I mean, it kind of is everything once you're in a nursing home, but it's completely unsustainable.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, nursing care generally is ten to $15,000 a month. So my mom is in a nursing home now. She started in assisted living, but she sort of that wasn't sufficient for her anymore. And she was also running out of money even in assisted living because it's never what you think it's going to be when you start out in assisted
Mm.
living. The care costs just kind of keep increasing and increasing. And so she's now on Medicaid because that's the only way she can afford that level of care that she needs. And so it's
Wow.
a big
So,
challenge.
yeah, it sounds like it. And I mean, I think it's a challenge that every person that's getting older has that challenge. So it's very universal, or at least in this country. I think it's so interesting, though, that we're seeing this increase in care migration, we can call it. Do you know where are some of the countries that people are choosing to relocate to. Mexico obviously was mentioned. What about Canada? Is that a viable option for people as well?
I mean, I think if you're not part of the Social Security network and able to live in Canada, I don't know the rules, but I'm pretty sure you can't just go and have socialized
Access.
healthcare when you're, already um, out of the workforce. I think mostly it's countries where the out-of-pocket private costs are just low enough that they can be paid for with retirees' income. So
Mm.
I think Mexico is a big one for those in the US and Canadians even. I've met Canadians whose parents have done the same thing, moved to Mexico. Other countries in Central America are probably an option, but less so maybe than Mexico because of the healthcare system there. And then I've heard India, Thailand, Southeast Asia are also destinations for care migration.
That makes a lot of sense. And I've noticed that most of these countries are also pretty, like, closer to the equator, a little more temperate. I can imagine that's just helps out with bringing some of the joy back to living in that case, like getting to be outside, a little easier pace of life. Since sometimes the US feels so busy, 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 fast paced, and people aren't really giving you the time and attention. And also, yeah, going outside is not highly encouraged here, I would say
Yeah, no,
sometimes.
absolutely. I mean, we have this is also a whole nother topic that I could say a lot about, but I think that the our society is not really conducive to multi-generational interaction, and our public spaces are really built for people in a sort of the primary working ages, right? So even children, I would say, compared to many other countries, are not generally um, looked at in a positive light in public places the way that they are
Mm,
in other countries. And the same is true for elders, that elders are much more respected, I think, in many other parts of the world and taken care of than they are in this country, sadly. Um, I think part of that is the culture of work above all else, capitalism, the focus on making money. Uh, so I would love to see more. And we are seeing some of this sort of multi generational living situations, which I think is really cool. People living or even not living daycares, for example, located in nursing homes. We have one here in Seattle that's been
oh,
highlighted in a number of news sources, but there's a preschool in a nursing home, and there's a lot of interaction between the elders and the children doing art projects together, playing music, singing, and it really is so beneficial for everybody. I mean, it brings this joy and sense of purpose back to a lot of the elders living there, and it's a great opportunity for kids to spend time with elders, which many I think have a lot less of than in previous generations. So, I'd love to see more of that kind of in the US, kind of opportunities for intergenerational um, communities and
yeah.
interaction.
Certainly, certainly. And on that, in that vein, I think being in the sandwich generation, that's also, it helps those out in the sandwich generation, right? Because then kids are getting more experience and familiarity with what it's like to be around a person who's aging, right? Then you also have the option of dropping them off at daycare, visiting your parents, and having them kind of taken care of. So I agree. I feel like we just need a lot more infrastructure and thought around what would make it easier for the caregivers in this country. Which brings me a little bit to my next question, which I think that we're talking about how expensive it is, the medical costs of aging. Do you have any, but it's also very true in this country that caregivers themselves are undervalued and underpaid. And I think there's a huge overlap with the fact that a lot of caregiving is at the moment a it's a woman-led industry, it's a woman-led responsibility. It often falls to, the daughters of the family or the daughter-in-laws of the family to be navigating the sandwich generation conflict. Um, can you talk a little bit about the connection between this kind of care crisis and then women's equity?
Yeah. Yeah, well, women have historically always done more of the care labor, both paid and unpaid. And I think that, in a society of patriarchy and capitalism that we live in, it is less valued for that reason. And it's either paid less for paid caregiving, or it's expected that women will do the unpaid care labor. And women, even just in the US, are doing two-thirds of the unpaid caregiving labor. And there are estimates that that is equivalent to anywhere from like 450 to 700 billion dollars in terms of the lost labor and economic participation in the workforce that's
Wow.
that you could value that at. And so um, you can see how that's a huge opportunity cost for women who are
Yeah.
doing all of this unpaid caregiving are also not participating in the labor force, or not fully participating, or underemployed, at least from a financial economic standpoint. And so that has huge consequences for women to then be able to get ahead and have the same economic participation as men. And this is why, I think that, I mean, well, one reason why I believe that we really need to support, from a public perspective, we need to support care infrastructure, and there needs to be opportunities for women to work and have support for their caregiving responsibilities, whether it's paid maternity and parental leave for both men and women, and because we see that the countries where that is offered, in a lot of Scandinavia, for example, gender equity is much higher. So there's a direct correlation. And we also saw, for example, last year, 2025, return to office mandates really kicked in, and a large number of women, I can't remember the exact statistic, but it's been quoted a lot recently, many women left the workforce last
Yeah.
year, and particularly in higher paying positions. And caregiving is the main reason for that. When, we're able to have more flexibility and practice remote work, which
Yeah.
doesn't impact productivity for in most positions, um, we are able to stay in and continue to do our paid labor. But so I think there's a lot of considerations that need to be taken into account when we're designing these policies at a national level. And also just thinking about our workplaces from a private industry perspective, businesses, the way they manage employees and employment, and the benefits they provide in our communities, making care labor visible, making it a valuable contribution to our society. That's something that I think will benefit everyone, and gender equity as a whole. So,
Definitely. I wonder if there's any advice you have for a woman who is currently taking on the load, the heavy burden, like most of the load of the caregiving. If there's any advice you have for how to navigate a conversation, maybe with their partner or someone else in their life, to kind of help take some of that off their plate.
yeah. Well, it really depends on specific circumstances, but I think starting those conversations as early as possible, even before the caregiving gets to be too much. I mean, hopefully
Yeah.
before it gets to be too much, and saying, I see these responsibilities coming in the future. Which ones would you like to do? And, or I can do this. How should we handle these other things? So really making it a we have this responsibility. How can we handle it? Let's discuss and map it out together, rather than just kind of silently doing it all, because that just sort of creates the expectation and the dependence. And that's on a personal level. Um, I think also looking for resources and really trying to take advantage of all the support that is out there. There isn't enough, but there are resources. There are care consultants who help people navigate these situations, and sometimes they're really worth spending some money on. I mean, there are some free resources, but there are also people who can really help you navigate the tricky situations, and don't feel bad about using those resources because you can't do everything. I mean, you're just going to burn out, and you need to take care of yourself. Sometimes you need to say no, you need to set boundaries, or you need to outsource things. And I think I've felt a lot of guilt about that, especially early on. I just felt like, oh, well, I can just do that one more thing. I can just do it. I'm going to, I don't need to like hire someone for that. Or it even felt like more work. But once I did actually engage a care consultant, it took so much weight off of my shoulders, both physically and emotionally. I mean,
Yeah.
I had more time freed up to do things, but I also there were certain sticky points where, depending on your relationship with your loved ones, it can be harder for a child to navigate sort of removing some independence from your parents' life than it can, a third party or somebody who's more neutral or kind of an outside force. So I found it helpful to kind of have somebody who was neutral navigate some of those situations for me or with me, and just talking me through some of the decisions. So I would really encourage that, if you're feeling even starting to feel overwhelmed by caregiving.
Yes, I love that advice. Even though all women are super women, we can't do it alone, and it's totally okay to ask for help, initiate these conversations, reach out, and like you said, turn to an expert when you can and get some advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we shouldn't just expect ourselves to be superheroes. We're not. We're actually just we're all normal people trying to take care of our loved ones, and you know, we need to focus on the resources available to those of us who are just trying to get through it. You know.
Yeah,
Um,
completely. Well, I think you're someone who's managed to navigate this not definitely not perfectly. There's no such thing as perfection, but beautifully. And in sharing your stories, you're helping so many others, even people like me, and um, we're really glad to have access to your information and your resources. Um, I'm gonna wrap up with a few quick questions, just little personal touches. But
yeah.
yeah, is there any books or pieces of media that you're interested in right now that you're reading or watching that you can recommend?
Sure. Well, so there's a number of caregiving shows and documentaries out there right now that are on my list, but I haven't read or watched them yet. But I do have a newsletter, a post about that. If you go to Jen Sandwich, those are very much on my list. But speaking of your question earlier, I think there is more momentum gaining in the media around these topics. But a book I read recently that I loved was "Crying in H Mart," which is a memoir by Michelle Zaumer, who talks about her. She's in the band Japanese Breakfast, so that's how she's sort of a well-known figure. But she cared for her mother with cancer, through her death, and writes beautifully about the experience. So it's nonfiction in that it's a memoir, but it's just a beautiful story as well. So I recommend that to people. And then on the nonfiction side, I always recommend the book Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, who, on the subject of having these conversations and having them earlier, I mean, he does a beautiful job just really illustrating why this is important to have these conversations and to talk about like what we really want, what really is quality of life when you're aging. It's not just simply making sure everyone is medically cared for or not dying. It's how can we ensure the quality of life? What does quality of life mean to you when you're older, and having those conversations. So in thinking about how to have those conversations with loved ones, that's a great place to start, is reading that book. And so yeah, that's a big recommendation for everyone.
Oh my God. Yeah, those are both great. Yeah, Crying in H Mart is. so impactful. I think I was crying while reading Crying in H Mart.
Yeah.
And then it's so funny you mentioned Being Mortal. I'm reading a different book by that author right now.
Oh,
So,
yeah. Yeah, he's great. He's a great writer too.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Anna. I've really enjoyed
Yeah.
getting to talk to you and hope that your journey continues fabulously.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ishanya, and thanks for having me. It was really great to join you for this conversation.
Of course. Take care.
Yeah, you too.